I opened that bucket of rice with a measuring cup already in my hand, 6 months after I'd packed it away, and there it was, a thin thread of web, right along the inside of the lid, right where I'd never have noticed it if I hadn't been looking straight down into the container. I just stood there for a second, holding that cup, thinking the same thought over and over. I did this right. I bought it, I poured it in, I sealed the lid myself, I checked it off my list. And it still happened anyway. If you've ever done everything you thought you were supposed to do and opened a container of food you'd stored away for exactly this kind of situation, only to find it ruined. Stay with me, because what I'm about to show you costs about $3, takes less than 2 minutes per container, and it's the one step that almost nobody tells you about when they tell you to start storing food. By the time we're done here, you'll know exactly what actually causes this. Why sealing the lid tight was never enough on its own, and the simple trick that stops it before it ever starts. Instead of after you've already lost what you were counting on. Here's what I didn't understand back then. And I think it's the reason so many of us get caught off guard by this. We assume that if we can't see anything wrong with the food when we buy it, it's clean. No bugs, no problem, straight into the container it goes. But rice, flour, oats, beans, most of what fills a pantry meant to last, can already be carrying something you'd never spot with your own eyes before it even leaves the store. Not a bug crawling around. Something smaller than that, tucked inside the grain itself, invisible until conditions are right for it to finish growing. And once it does, it doesn't matter how tightly you sealed that lid. The problem was never outside the container. It was already inside it.
I found out how common this actually is from a woman at my church, of all places, standing in the parking lot after service, mentioning almost in passing that she'd lost nearly a full container of flour to what she called the bugs getting into it. She said it so casually, like it was just something that happens, the way weather happens. And I remember driving home afterward thinking about my own pantry, lined up with bags of rice and beans exactly the way they'd come from the store shelf, and feeling this quiet drop in my stomach, because I realized I might have made the exact same mistake without ever knowing it. I want to say this clearly, because I know how it sounds the first time you hear it. This is not something to feel embarrassed about. And it's definitely not a sign that you did something careless. Nobody teaches you this. There's no class on how to store food for months at a time. No manual that comes with the bag of rice explaining what happens to it after you bring it home. Most of us learn how to buy food. Almost nobody teaches us how to actually keep it, long term, the way an emergency really requires. And that gap between buying and truly storing is exactly where this problem lives, quietly, until the day you open the container and find out the hard way. Here's the part that actually surprised me once I understood it properly, and it's worth hearing slowly. Studies on stored grain have shown that a significant portion of dry goods like flour, rice, and cereal can already carry insect eggs at a microscopic level, present before the product ever reaches a store shelf, let alone your kitchen. That's not a reason to panic. And I don't want you walking away from this feeling like every bag in your pantry is already ruined, because it isn't. It's simply a reason to store things the right way from the very first day, instead of assuming that a clean-looking bag from the store means a truly clean container 6 months from now. So before we go any further, I want to ask you something, because it changes how you think about every single thing already sitting in your pantry right now. How many of your containers were sealed the same day you brought that food home, versus how many sat open on a counter or in their original bag for a few days first while you got around to organizing them? There's no wrong answer here. I want you to just notice it, because that gap, even a few days, is exactly where this trick makes the biggest difference. Here's what actually works, and it costs about $3 for enough to treat several containers. Food-grade diatomaceous earth. Not the kind used for pool filters. That's a different product entirely. And it matters that you get the food-grade version, clearly labeled as safe for human consumption, sold right alongside canning supplies or in the health section of most stores. It looks like a fine white powder, almost like flour itself, and it works in a way that has nothing to do with poison or chemicals at all. Under a microscope, it's made of tiny, sharp fragments, harmless to us, but devastating to the exoskeleton of any insect trying to survive inside your grain. Here's exactly how to use it. For a 5-gallon bucket of rice, beans, or flour, mix in about 1 to 2 tablespoons of food-grade diatomaceous earth per gallon of dry goods, stirring it through as evenly as you can, the same way you'd fold flour into a batter, making sure it's distributed throughout rather than sitting in one layer at the top. It won't change the taste of your food, and it's approved as safe for consumption in the amounts you're using here, which is exactly why it's used in food storage circles, not just pest control. The moment you add it, mixed evenly through, you've made that entire container inhospitable to anything trying to hatch inside it later, rather than waiting to discover a problem you can't undo. If you've already got containers sealed up and stored away, exactly like I did with that rice, don't panic, and don't assume you have to start over on everything. Open each one, and I mean actually open every single one, not just the ones you have a bad feeling about, because the ones that look perfectly fine are usually the ones that surprise you later. Look for any sign of clumping that wasn't there before, any faint, musty smell that doesn't match what dry rice or flour should smell like, or any small holes in grains that should otherwise look whole and uniform. If you see none of that, add your diatomaceous earth now, mix it through, and reseal. You've caught it in time. If you do see signs of a problem already, that container's contents need to go, but at least now you know, instead of finding out the day you actually need it. One more thing that matters just as much as the diatomaceous earth itself: what you're storing your food in. A thin plastic bag from the store, even a good one, was never built to keep out what a proper airtight container will. Mylar bags, food-grade 5-gallon buckets with gasket-sealed lids, or glass jars with real rubber seals. These are what actually hold a seal for months at a time, not just days. If you've got food sitting in its original packaging inside a cabinet right now, that's the very first thing worth changing before anything else. I want to be honest with you about what this does and doesn't solve, because I think that honesty matters more than making any of this sound like a cure-all. Food-grade diatomaceous earth, used correctly in a properly sealed container, is one of the most reliable ways to protect stored dry goods that I know of, and it's safe enough that I use it in my own pantry without a second thought. But it's not a fix for food that's already gone bad, and it's not a substitute for checking your containers every few months, the same way you'd check batteries in a smoke detector. If you ever open a container and the smell is clearly off, or there's visible mold, that's not something diatomaceous earth or any home trick will reverse. That's food that needs to be thrown out. And there's no shame in that either. It's simply information, telling you what to do differently next time. Now, I know most people trying to build a real emergency food supply end up guessing at half of this, wondering what actually keeps food safe for months versus what just sounds like it should work. I already put together exactly what to store, how much per person, and how to store it properly so it's still good when you actually need it, inside the complete guide. 13 sections in total, food storage covered right alongside water, extreme heat, and keeping the lights on without a generator. It's pinned in the very first comment underneath this video, if you'd like the whole thing laid out in one place. Here's what I really want you to take from all of this, underneath the powder and the buckets and the practical steps. Learning to store food properly, on your own, without anyone standing beside you double-checking your work, isn't a sign that you're behind, or that you should have known this already. It's the quiet, unglamorous work of becoming the kind of person who doesn't have to wonder, months from now, whether what you set aside will actually be there when you reach for it. Nobody hands you that confidence. You build it, one container at a time, the same patient way you're doing it right now. That's what real readiness actually looks like in a pantry. Not a room full of buckets you're secretly unsure about. A handful of containers you know, without opening a single one to check, are exactly as good today as the day you sealed them. If you're the kind of person who'd rather get this right quietly than find out the hard way later, you're already one of the ready ones. Subscribe if you'd like the next piece of this, and tell me down in the comments which container in your own pantry you're checking first after watching this. Next week, I'll show you the mistake almost everyone makes with canned goods that has nothing to do with the expiration date at all, and the 2-minute check that tells you the real story before you ever open the can. I'll see you there.